Before mankind carved its first story into stone, before firelight carried legends from one generation to the next, the world belonged to thunder. Teeth, claws, and instinct. This was not a place built for mercy. It was a planet that breathed through mist, roared through valleys, and tested every living thing with hunger, fear, and fire. In that ancient world, survival was not given. It had to be earned with every step, every breath, and every choice made in the shadow of something larger. And somewhere between the gray cliffs and the endless prehistoric forest, one man walked alone. His name was Kael Stonefang. A lone warrior of the old world, tall, hardened, and scarred by years of surviving where most men would have vanished before sunrise. His black hair fell rough around his shoulders. A short beard framed his weathered face. Across his left cheek, a thin scar ran down toward his chin, a quiet reminder that the forest had touched him before and let him live. He wore dark animal hide, bone charms across his chest, leather wraps around his arms, a stone spear in his hand, and a blade at his side. But Kael's greatest weapon was not stone. It was patience. He had learned the language of the wild. He knew when the birds were silent for a reason. He knew when the wind carried warning. He knew that in this world, fear was not weakness. Fear was information. At sunrise, the valley burned red beneath a sky filled with ancient wings. Pterodons crossed the morning haze as mist crawled between massive cliffs. Far in the distance, a sleeping volcano smoked against the horizon. The world seemed beautiful, almost peaceful, but peace, in the prehistoric age, never lasted long. Kael was running. His bare feet slammed into wet mud. Water splashed around his ankles. Dirt and dried blood clung to his skin. But he did not look down. Behind him, the forest shook. Branches snapped. Birds scattered. The insects went silent. Something enormous was coming through the trees. Kael was not running away from death. He was leading it away from the living. Through the fog, the shape of a Tyrannosaurus Rex emerged like a moving mountain. Its massive head broke through the trees. Its breath rolled hot through the cold morning air. Then came the roar, deep and violent, echoing off the cliffs until the valley itself seemed to tremble. Kael tightened his grip on his spear and pushed harder through the jungle. The beast behind him was not simply hunting. It ruled by making every other creature remember how small it was. In this world, man was only a fragile breath between the jaws of an age that did not care. Kael reached the edge of a cliff too late. The ground gave way beneath him. He slid down the muddy rock and caught a thick root with one hand. His body swung over the open drop. Stones broke loose and disappeared into the depths below. Above him, the T-Rex stepped closer, its shadow spreading across the cliff face. This was not a story about victory. This was a story about the cost of staying alive. Kael looked down into the canyon. Then he looked up at the beast. For one sharp second, everything became still. The wind, the fog, the sound of his own breath. Then Kael let go with one hand, twisted his body, and threw himself toward a narrow ledge beside him just as the jaws of the monster crashed forward. The roar blended with the wind. White mist swallowed the world. And 3 days earlier, the hunt had begun. The prehistoric planet was never quiet. It breathed, growled, hunted, and fed every creature with the same brutal hand. Kael had crossed endless forests of giant ferns, wide lakes covered in silver mist, black fields of ancient lava stone, and valleys where the bones of old giants lay half buried in the earth. He knew that every landscape had rules. The forest punished arrogance. The water punished carelessness. The open plains punished hesitation. From a rocky ridge, Kael watched a herd of triceratops move through a fog-covered meadow. The adults walked in a protective circle, their young staying close at their sides. Their horns cut through the morning haze like weapons carved by the earth itself. Kael watched them in silence. He had learned long ago that strength did not always come from claws and teeth. Sometimes it came from staying together. But Kael had no herd. He moved alone. To survive, he made himself part of the land. He rubbed mud across his skin to hide his scent. He crouched near streams and waited for fish to break the surface. He listened for the difference between wind in the leaves and movement in the brush. Every meal was a negotiation with nature. Every footprint was a warning. And one morning, when he found a dinosaur track pressed deep into the mud, he placed his own hand beside it and saw the truth again. He was not walking through an empty world. He was walking through someone else's territory. Across a field of black volcanic stone, Kael saw a group of stegosaurus feeding among the low trees. Their plated backs rose and fell through the mist like ancient shields. They did not hunt him. They did not care about him. But one frightened step from a creature that size could end a human life in an instant. So Kael lowered his body, moved with the grass, and circled wide around them. Survival was not about defeating everything in your path. It was about knowing when not to wait. When night came, the world changed owners. Kael built a small shelter beneath a rock overhang and hung tiny bones from a strip of hide. A warning bell for anything that came too close. Beside a weak fire, he sharpened his stone knife and stared into the darkness. Fire did not chase the night away. It only showed him what waited inside it. Beyond the firelight, eyes glowed between the trees. They watched. They measured. They waited. The prehistoric night did not sleep. It listened. And in his loneliness, Kael was not looking for peace. He was looking for proof that morning still existed. The next day, on a red stone wall deep in the canyon, Kael found a handprint painted in earth-colored pigment. It was not the mark of a beast. It was the mark of people. As he followed the signs, smoke appeared above the cliffs. Hidden between towering red rocks was a village. Tents made of hide, spears of wood and bone, faces painted with clay and ash, people moving carefully, speaking softly, always watching the forest. The Red Valley tribe. In a land ruled by claws, humans had learned to gather into their own kind of pack. But to a man who had been alone too long, human voices could feel more dangerous than animal growls. Kael stayed behind the brush and studied them. He had not come to take anything. He needed passage through the forbidden northern lands. So he placed a fresh fish on a flat stone and stepped back, offering it as a sign of peace. 3 warriors came out with spears pointed at his chest. Kael lowered his own spear to the ground and raised his hands. The first language between survivors is always suspicion. Their leader stepped forward, a middle-aged man with red markings across his face and eyes as hard as sun-baked stone. He looked at Kael not as a guest, but as a risk. The Red Valley people believed the deep forest cursed anyone who crossed the sacred stones. Kael spoke calmly. He did not want blood. He only wanted to pass through. But the world did not wait for human negotiations. The ground began to shake. Birds exploded from the forest canopy. Dust slid down the canyon walls. Then, from the far end of the valley, a herd of frightened herbivores charged through the open ground, kicking up a storm of red dust. When the plant eaters run, every creature must ask the same question. What is chasing them? Kael dropped to one knee and pressed his palm to the earth. He felt the rhythm through the stone. His face darkened. Not one hunter. A pack. From the forest edge, velociraptors appeared, low to the ground, fast, silent, intelligent. They moved like shadows with teeth. They were not hunting with strength alone. They were hunting with patience. The warriors of the tribe formed a spear wall at the front of the village. But Kael saw what they did not. A narrow path behind the tents. Children standing too close to the opening. The tribe was preparing for an attack from the front. But smart hunters never choose the door everyone is watching. One raptor slipped through the back canyon. Kael moved before anyone understood why. He sprinted behind the village, reached the narrow passage, and pulled a young boy away just as the raptor's shadow swept past him. There was no time for thanks, no time for words, but in that instant, Kael was no longer just a stranger. The village erupted into chaos. Families rushed into shelters. Warriors formed a defensive circle. Raptors hissed from the canyon walls, testing every gap, every fear, every weakness. Kael stood in the center of the narrow pass, his stone spear in hand. A lone man can survive by hiding. But to protect others, he has to stand still. Kael slowed his breathing. He watched the pack shift around him. They did not all attack at once. They wanted him to turn his back. So Kael drove his spear into the ground and struck the wooden shaft with a stone. The sharp sound cracked through the canyon. The raptors stopped. Kael was not stronger than them. He simply knew that every living thing fears what it does not understand. Torches were lit. Flames rose in a half circle. The tribe began to follow Kael's movements. Fire, stone, echoes. The first weapons of mankind were not born from power. They were born from memory. As fear found a single direction, strangers began to become allies. Together, Kael and the Red Valley warriors pushed the raptors back toward a narrow rock passage. They did not need to destroy the pack. They only needed to convince it that this village was not worth the price. But in every pack, there is one hunter that does not leave because it is hungry. It stays because it has been challenged. The alpha raptor climbed the rocks above the village. Eyes locked on Kael, it moved with cold intelligence, waiting for the moment to strike from above. Kael saw it. He whispered, almost to himself, "I see you." The raptor leapt. Kael threw a leather rope around a hidden post and pulled. A rough net of thorned branches dropped between them, slamming across the rock and cutting off the attack. The beast crashed back, snarling. In this world, the best trap did not kill. It bought time. One by one, the raptors faded back into the trees. The fight ended not with a victorious cry, but with the silence of those still breathing. The boy Kael had saved came forward. In his hands was a small wooden figure carved in the shape of a triceratops. He offered it to Kael. For a moment, Kael did not move, then he took it gently. In that small hand, Kael received something he had not held in years. Trust. But trust could not erase danger. At the edge of the forest, Kael found another sign pressed into the mud. A massive footprint, a T-Rex track. It lay over the raptor prints like a shadow over smaller shadows. The raptors had not come to invade the village. They had been running from something bigger. The tribal leader saw the track and his expression changed. Slowly, he pointed toward the northern mountains, where black mist gathered between the peaks. There was a name his people did not speak in daylight. Blackfang, the ruler of the northern hunting grounds. Kael had always believed that walking alone was the only way to avoid losing anyone else. But some paths cannot be crossed by loneliness. The next morning, he left the village with 2 Red Valley warriors and entered the mist-covered forest. The wooden triceratops was now tied to his chest strap, swinging with each step, a small gift, a reminder that his life was no longer the only one carried by his footsteps. They reached a wide lake beneath a blanket of fog. Dead trees rose from the water like the ribs of buried giants. The forbidden land did not need walls. It protected itself with what waited beneath the surface. Bubbles rose near the shore. A large shadow moved under the muddy water. Kael raised his hand. Everyone stopped. He picked up a heavy branch and threw it into the lake. The water exploded. A giant crocodile surged upward, clamped its jaws around the wood, and vanished beneath the surface. Kael had not tested courage. He had tested the monster's patience. The group moved along the high rocks, staying away from the shoreline. Beneath them, the dark shape followed. A mistake on land could sometimes be corrected with speed. A mistake in the water gave no second chance. Beyond the lake, they crossed a golden plain at sunset. A herd of mammoths moved through the dust, huge and solemn, their breath rising in the evening air. They were not enemies. Some giants simply pass through your life like mountains that know how to breathe. Kael lowered his head as they passed. He did not bow to kings. He bowed to creatures that had belonged to this world longer than man. But beauty in the open grass always hides claws beneath it. A saber-toothed cat stepped out from the tall grass and blocked their path. It did not charge. It did not roar. It watched. Kael lowered his spear but did not attack. He understood that look. The animal did not want battle. It wanted them gone. Kael placed a strip of dried meat on the ground and slowly stepped back. Sometimes survival does not come from the point of a spear. Sometimes it comes from knowing when to pay the toll. The saber-tooth sniffed the offering, then turned away. No victory, no glory, just one more day granted by the wild. At last, they entered the dead forest. Burned trees stood like black bones. Gray ash drifted through the air. The north was different from the rest of the world. There, the forest was not green. It remembered fire. On one charred trunk, Kael found claw marks taller than a man. He placed his hand against them and felt the scale of what they were hunting. Blackfang did not simply kill. He marked his kingdom. That night, the three men sat around a small fire. No one spoke. The flames were weak. The darkness felt too close. Kael stared into the trees and knew the truth. If Blackfang followed their scent back to the village, everyone in Red Valley could be gone before sunrise. Then, behind the burned trunks, a giant eye opened in the dark. The thing they were searching for had found them first. Blackfang stepped out of the gray mist. A massive Tyrannosaurus Rex, his body caked with dried mud, his scarred jaws lined with ancient power. One dark tooth stood out among the rest. Black as burned bone, he did not need to run. The forest had already learned to move out of his way. Kael did not panic. He studied the ground, the trees, the rocks, the narrow places. Then he signaled the two warriors to split apart. To survive in front of a predator king, a man does not need to be stronger. He only needs to think faster than fear. The chase began. They ran through the burned forest as Blackfang crashed after them. Dead trees shattered, ash filled the air. Every step from the giant beast struck the earth like a drumbeat counting down their lives. Beneath each footprint, the world seemed to remember how small humans were. Then Kael saw it. A narrow canyon ahead. A place where Blackfang's size could become a burden. Kael changed direction and led the beast straight toward it. He was not running from Blackfang anymore. He was leading him to the place where strength would turn against itself. The canyon walls rose high and tight. Blackfang forced himself between them, roaring so loudly the sound bounced from stone to stone. In the canyon, a roar did more than threaten. It betrayed the position of the beast that made it. One Red Valley warrior pulled a hidden leather rope. Rocks dropped behind Blackfang, cutting off his path. Humans did not win with claws. They won by remembering where every stone could fall. But a cornered king is still a king. Blackfang slammed against the canyon wall. Stone cracked. Dust exploded. He forced his way forward. Eyes locked on Kael. Kael looked toward the ravine beside the canyon. He remembered the cliff, the root, the breath between life and death, and he understood what he had to do. He whispered, "Forest, give me away." Then he ran. Kael sprinted along the narrow ledge as Blackfang broke through the stone behind him. Rocks burst loose. Dust swallowed the air. There are moments when man no longer fights nature. He gambles that nature wants balance too. Kael leapt across the ravine and reached for the roots on the other side. Behind him, Blackfang charged too hard onto loose rock. The ground shifted. His massive foot slipped. The beast slid down the slope, crashing into a lower shelf of stone beneath the canyon. He did not die. He roared from the dust, furious and alive, separated from Kael by the ravine. Blackfang was not gone. He had only been stopped long enough for men to breathe. Kael hung from the roots on the cliff wall, his arms shaking, his face covered in ash. The two Red Valley warriors reached him and pulled him up. He collapsed onto the stone, staring at the gray sky above. Kael Stonefang was alive. But in this world, surviving today was only an invitation for tomorrow to test you again. When they returned to Red Valley, the setting sun poured red light over the village. The people stood waiting in silence. No one cheered. Survivors knew that too much joy could wake the wrong gods. The boy ran forward and saw that Kael had returned. Kael untied the wooden triceratops and tried to give it back, but the boy pushed it gently toward him. A gift returned a second time is no longer a thank you. It becomes a promise. The tribal leader stepped forward and placed a hand on Kael's shoulder. For the first time, he did not look at him as a stranger. He looked at him as an ally. The lonely man had found a fire that did not belong only to him. But night came quickly. And while the village slept, the earth outside the canyon trembled. Water inside a stone bowl began to ripple. Far to the north, under the moonlight, one massive shape moved across the horizon. Then another. And another. Blackfang was not the last predator. He was only the thing running ahead of the storm. Beside the dying fire, Kael opened his eyes. A distant roar rolled across the valley. Deeper than thunder, older than fear. He sat up, reached for his stone spear, and stared into the darkness. The firelight reflected in his eyes. And in the silence of the prehistoric night, Kael Stonefang whispered, "If the forest calls my name again, I will answer."